So I will just scroll over to where our Mentimeter response is at on wheels. I think it's, hey, I got one more on the wheelchair. So which wheels do you prefer? And this was the consensus looks like bicycling is the preferred way to go. So that's good to know. So I'll stop sharing my screen just to make a quick round of introductions, and maybe we can all, it's a small enough group today, we can see who all's in the room, and there are more slides to talk about, and you'll have more opportunities to participate. But thank you all for joining today. My name is Matt Kleinman. I work with Wayne In as a research assistant, and I help coordinate the Physical Activity in Parks and Infrastructure Working Group, otherwise lovingly referred to as PAPI or POPI if you want to turn it into an acronym. So, and I'm going to just popcorn around to the co-leads. Laura, do you want to go first?
So my name is Laura Steele. I am the Director of Education at Bike Walk KC. Did you want should we do any other kind of personal information or anything like that?
Totally up to you. You can set the stage for everyone to follow.
Well, I'll just be swift. That's it.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. I popcorn. Jen.
Hi, my name is Jen Jett. I'm the Superintendent of Community Services for Kansas City, Missouri Parks and Recreation, and I am the co-lead of the POPI group and the Parks and Recreation work group for the KCPA plan. And let's go with Emily. Always have such a friendly face. It's hard to not stop on it.
Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Myson-Sebelius. I'm excited to join our groups together today. I'm a project coordinator at Weighing In, and I support the Healthy Schools working group for the Kansas City Physical Activity Plan. So welcome, everyone, and thanks for PAPI group for letting us join in your standing time today. And thanks, everyone, for being here. So I'll pop it over to Michelle Dake, who's our one of our co-chairs on the Healthy Schools group.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Michelle Dake. I'm the Director of Youth Initiatives at KC Healthy Kids, and I co-lead the Healthy Schools group with Robin Stewie from Midwest Dairy, who I don't think is on the call today, with a lot of help from Emily. So glad to see you all. Oh.
We lost your audio.
Oh, sorry. I'll send it over to Lee to introduce herself.
Thanks. I'm Lee Kurtek, and I'm the program director with Girls on the Run. I'm glad to be here. Oh, I'll pass it off to Nicole.
Hi, Nicole Brown, Johnson County Health and Environment. I'm actually on both of these work groups. So this is like the best meeting ever for me. I feel like it's a twofer today. So that's a good thing. And I will pass it to my coworker, Katie Shoddy.
Hi, this is Katie Shoddy, and I'm the Safe Kids Coordinator for Johnson County, and I work with the Johnson County Department of Health and Environment as well. And I will pass it off to Mary.
Probably me, Mariana Hengler. I'm with Jackson County Health Department. Sorry, my video is not working today, and I'm a program and policy specialist there. And I think I see, is it a Haley?
Yes. Hi, I'm Haley Weinberg. I'm a graduate student at Kansas State University, getting my master's in landscape architectures, and I've been focusing on the potential for Brush Creek Greenway in Kansas City, Missouri to serve as more of a community health asset, just in light of its location and the recent kind of attention that it's been getting from investment from different city departments. And so I'm kind of here just to listen into what you guys are, kind of what the current state of the conversation is right now. So yeah, I know I've talked to a couple of you, I think Matt and Jen before, so thanks for making this public, I guess. So thanks.
Glad you're here. Is anyone else not gonna know? I see Robin on the call. Robin, do you want to go?
Hi there, Robin Shook, Children's Mercy.
Anybody else that has not yet introduced himself? I lost track of who's not gone yet. So if you haven't gone, feel free to jump in. All right.
I haven't gone yet. My name is Blake Hensley. I'm with the Unified Government Health Department.
Hey Blake, I saw that I could call you into the meeting, so thanks for answering the call.
Yeah, no worries.
You don't have to stay if you don't want to. I just figured, hey, I see Blake's available on my teams, so thanks for doing that. Yeah, I don't know if there are any others, but if you want to add your name in the chat, feel free. I'm gonna go back and share my screen because that's where we have a couple slides for today. And if you haven't already participated, feel free to take the Mentimeter, which we're going to use throughout today's meeting. You can do that by going to menti.com and using this code, or there's a QR code I'll show you in just a second. But this is just an icebreaker question that kind of gets you using the tool. But we asked, which wheels do you prefer? And the vast majority of those that participated said bicycling. So if you want to hop on that with your phone, it's the easiest way to do it. You could just pull up your camera and mouse over that QR code, and you'll be able to participate really easily on your phone. So I'm going to go ahead and start the rest of the meeting. There's an agenda that we can get through briefly, and then it's going to be mostly quick updates and an open discussion. And so as Michelle and Laura and Jen mentioned, this is kind of our first attempt at doing a cross-sector conversation. So groups that have organized and been a part of the Kansas City Physical Activity Plan, in our respective silos have been talking about ways that schools and parks and infrastructure relate with one another, but we've never done that with each other. And so I'm really interested in hearing, and listening in and letting you all kind of run the agenda for today's meeting. But there are a couple of things that I just want to get through briefly. The first is that there are, to follow these groups, a couple of opportunities to participate and you just kind of stay up to date. And I don't know if everybody knows about them yet, but I'll put a link here in the chat once the updates start when I have a second. The first is that we have updated our Weighing In quarterly, or our Weighing In newsletter, which features a June 10th quarterly meeting, which will be at 9 a.m. And so y'all are welcome to register for that and participate. I know it'll be a great conversation. So you might see a new format in our Weighing In newsletters. We're trying to keep things updated and fresh, and we're excited to be able to share more helpful resources with all of you. The second is that Healthy Schools has its own newsletter. Emily can talk about that, but Emily, do you want to say a little bit more about I picked out the Bike to School Day and Bike Month part of your newsletter. I know a lot of these events have passed, but do you want to talk a little bit about that newsletter briefly?
Sure. Thanks, Matt. And I'll put in the chat too in a second some of the links Matt's talking about. But yeah, if you are interested in keeping up to date with the Healthy Schools group, we do send out meeting notices, events, and then action items on the things we're working on together. And so Matt has up here a nice little visual from the work that you all did together, identified as a first step on the KCPA plan, which was doing some collaborative promotion of Bike to School Day specifically, and physical activity during Bike Month. So hopefully you all recognize the work that you did in those bullet points. I know Katie and Nicole and Laura and many others were involved in creating a toolkit for schools to use and promote this year. So and then Matt helped us enable us to put that on the KCPA Plan website. So those are the types of things we'll have in that newsletter, as well as meeting minutes and updates for future work. So if you aren't on that listserv and want to be, you can just put your information in the chat, or we'll put a link in a minute to sign up for that.
Yep.
Thanks.
And likewise, thanks, Emily. And likewise, the Physical Activity and Parks and Infrastructure has a newsletter. It's really been recently promoting past meetings. So if you ever want to check in, we're recording all these meetings like we are today, putting them on YouTube under a KCPA Plan kind of channel. So people can check in and see the work that's being done. But also, there's an example of a project that's coming up. And so I highlighted in this slide that there's a conversation on STP criteria later this week. Some of you might all be participating in that, but that's the Surface Transportation Program. And the way that this working group has worked is that every third meeting, we kind of have a regroup session like this to have a more of an open conversation. And then we decide on what the next 2 meetings are going to look like specifically. And so the last one, the last 2 were about health equity and policies. And one of the policy presentations was on the surface transportation program that the Mid-America Regional Council is working on. This is a way that all federal funding for roads gets distributed. And that conversation, there's a smaller group that wants to talk about how we can adjust the evaluation criteria to encourage physical activity in the built environment on our roads. And so there's opportunities to like kind of take on specific projects as part of the working group on PAPI, much like what Healthy Schools is already doing. So just wanted to let y'all know that there's 3 different newsletters that Wayne is supporting, and we'll share those links here in a second. I'm going to go to the next slide and then just give some space. And Michelle, Laura, and Jen, I think Jen stepped away, but she might be back. But feel free to give an update on the sector groups initiatives overall. And I'll have a slide here in a second. That'll be a survey question that'll kind of give some perspective on what folks are interested in for today's meeting. It will give us some background. So Michelle, feel free to take it away.
Sure. So as you all can see, we have 3 main strategies with our Healthy Schools group. One's around the comprehensive school physical activity program model. And one of the best practices in there that I think will come up today is active transportation. And we've really focused as a group within this model on active transportation, before and after school physical activity, and activity breaks throughout the day for students. So there's a lot of strategies and tactics within this model, but that's the area of focus, at least for now. Our second strategy is around professional development for all educators and all staff to be champions for physical activity within the school building. And the last is around advocacy, so advocating for stronger policies around recess, activity breaks, and PE within schools. So where we are now as a school, as a Healthy Schools group, is really planning to do a lot of listening again. So this is a regrouping time for us. This last school year has been a lot for our school partners, which is nothing new for many of you on the call who've been doing this work with us. So really reaching out to our contacts and school leadership to really to see where they're at and then how their priorities align with the KCPA plan and see how we can work together. So really trying to listen and learn and meet in the middle with our school partners.
Great, Michelle, thank you so much. And so just as a quick chance for those to participate, I just put the link in the chat, but feel free to take this survey question. I'm going to switch over here. So the question is about sort of the emphasis on types of programs that can support physical activity as it relates to schools. And so I just pulled a couple of examples together from the work that everyone has been kind of engaged in and working on as it relates to infrastructure, as it relates to park spaces, and as it relates to schools. So trying to find a way to highlight some examples of projects. And clearly this isn't a comprehensive list, but examples like shared use agreements with schools where neighborhoods can work to use the track spaces or recreation spaces around those schools. Obviously, safe routes to schools and safe routes to parks are related, but somewhat different proposals. Walking school buses are an example that many of y'all are probably familiar with, and then outdoor classrooms and parks. And there we go. It looks like the first person jumped in. So you're able to participate on this just by kind of adding points to each category that you think is most important. So you might put 100 points in one category. You might spread it out evenly. And if you can think of another and you want to talk about it later, feel free to add one on that other category as we start to think about what else needs to be highlighted or promoted through the KCPA plan. So I'm going to take a second to do my own. But Emily, do you have any perspective on this? How much of this has come through in your guys' Healthy Schools conversations?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So as Michelle mentioned, when we took a look at that strategy around the comprehensive school physical activity program model. It truly is a comprehensive model that includes a lot of these sorts of best practices within about 5 domains. And so the group spent a meeting when we were developing the KCPA plan, really looking at some of those practices within that model. And certainly, as Michelle mentioned, active transportation really rose up high on the top for the group, and that I think of Safe Routes to School is under that umbrella of active transportation to schools. We did talk about joint use as well, and Michelle, you can jump in, and others who are part of that conversation. I think it was definitely high priority, and I think there was also some consensus that a lot of work had been done around that, and there may not be a lot of space left at this time for movement on that sort of but I think that's still something that would be really interesting to hear from others about that. But that was sort of, I know that was part of our documented kind of conversation within that comprehensive school physical activity program model on that before and after school piece.
And Andrea in the chat popped in and said there's a series of reports on community use in Missouri. Andrea, do you want to take a second just to share your perspective on that?
Yeah, a few years ago, the Public Health Law Center and KC Healthy Kids did a series of guides that are like a toolkit to make community use agreements in the state of Missouri. So there's all kinds of information there about implementing community use agreements effectively, checklists, how to work with school districts, issues of insurance, like all those kinds of things. So there's a toolkit available on our website. I put the link in the chat.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andrea. That's great. And I might touch base with you later on to see if that's something we can promote through the KCPA plan, just a link back to your guys' website. So thanks for that. So I'm going to go on back to the updates in the slides and give Laura a chance to share an update on infrastructure.
So the update I'm going to give is actually around a project that we are working on. So after having come up with the strategies and priorities through the KCPA plan, working very closely with parks and actually starting to do an implementation project. So our project is called Central Connections, and it is based out of Central Park in Kansas City, Missouri. So that is about Indiana and 31st Street or so on the east side. There is a middle school and a high school, as well as a YMCA situated in a neighborhood, as well as a Kansas City, Missouri park, Central Park. And so what we are doing is we are working with Move More, Get More out of UMKC and a group of middle school students to engage them in things like walk audits, and then a temporary traffic calming project. And what we're thinking about right now for our traffic calming demonstration is to actually have the kids help decorate a crosswalk. That'll just be up for a day, and then we'll have a event where we are working with the neighborhood and encouraging them to come and use that crosswalk to get from the neighborhood side over into the park, hearing feedback from passerbys and as well as the kids. And so the whole focus again is around kind of measuring youth empowerment through things like walk audits and connecting them with decision makers. So whether that's public works staff, any electeds, other decision makers, as well as trying to find some further connections from the community to the park so people can have that accessibility for physical activity. Again, we're kind of on the verge. We've submitted a permit to do our temporary traffic calming demonstration. That is June 12th. That we are looking to do that. And we would love to have people come out and, give feedback to the kids and things like that. And so that's kind of my update.
Laura, do you think that the process of how you all have engaged with the kids and identified the space and sought grant funding, all of that might be useful as a template for other schools or school districts to consider applying in their own areas?
Yes. Trying to think here. You were talking and I had something that just popped top of mind and then I lost it. No. But yeah, I think working with youth, on one hand, really kind of helps us all think outside the box, and hear a perspective that we aren't used to hearing. And I think that if we can make early advocates with youth, we're going to grow up to have better engaged adults. And so I think, an opportunity like this where we're drawing those connections between access to physical activity, but also how your built environment could prevent or encourage that, and them having a voice on saying what it ultimately looks like, is a really powerful tool. So, when this is all said and done, I do think that this is an approach that could be replicated. It may look different in different areas, but I think, that this is a good approach.
Yeah, and I know Andrea Clark's probably in the chat thinking, walking detective is also, like there's a lot of other tools out there, just like what y'all are doing. But I think it's great to see the variety of perspectives, and so we'll definitely. I think one thing I mentioned earlier, but I think the KCPA plan is as we're getting further along and maturing with the seeing the work being done, sharing those resources and tools from other organizations like Bike Walk KC, like KC Healthy Kids, who are doing the work, so that it's easy to find a reference for example, a school that's wanting to do something similar in their backyard. So there is a survey question attached, or a survey question, a word cloud attached to this. So if you go back to your Mentimeter participation, I know earlier we said that safe routes to schools seemed like the most popular. If you go to the Mentimeter and use the code or use the link in the chat or that QR code earlier, what else might be something that Kansas City needs the more safe routes to? And feel free to use schools and parks, but are there any other destinations that, thinking through the perspective of, Kansas City in general, but also maybe the youth that the Healthy Schools group is primarily focused on, where else might we see safe routes go towards? And you can enter as many times as you like. So feel free to add your thoughts, and we'll start seeing them pop here in a second. Whoever said grocery stores is a person after my own heart. Thank you for saying that. All right, so Laura, as the infrastructure co-lead, I'm really curious. Safe routes to school, safe routes to parks, they tend to get all the support and funding in this space, but I'm seeing grocery stores pop out real big. Is there any thoughts from your perspective, as the co-lead of the infrastructure sector and with Bike Walk KC, like what would a safe routes to some of these other ideas look like?
Yeah, I really like the variety of things that I'm seeing here. I think looking at this from the approach of, the corridors that are, the corridors that lead to places like these grocery stores, community centers, health clinics, things like that, taking a real strong look at those and making sure that, not only are they safe, but they're also engaging places, in terms of trying to find, it's easy to say, yeah, let's get a safe route to the grocery store, but then also how do we indicate to users that that is the safe route? and so maybe it's also looking at how are we kind of just reactivating those spaces again so that people are drawn to use them and to be in them, but also it's like, oh, and it's on my way to the grocery store. So I don't know if I quite answered your question there, Matt, as I'm looking at this, but what's kind of going through my head here is definitely making sure that, essential destinations, are supported by safe routes, but also they are, the easy choices, but then they're the fun choices to go to as well, like the fun routes to go as well.
And I'm also thinking that we always say safe routes to places, but we never say from where. And I think the implication is there's always safe routes from your home to this place. But as we all know, we're in a variety of spaces every day. And I wonder if, for the context of this conversation with healthy schools, what would it look like if you had a safe routes from a school to a grocery store? How does that change the perspective if you're allowing kids to have better access to a place where they can pick up a healthy snack, or a place where they can go outside? So it's interesting to see the grocery stores and community centers and neighborhoods really highlighted in transit as well, and libraries too. And we don't see those a lot in that safe routes space. So thanks for all participating. So I'll go back to the parks, and then we're going to have an open discussion shortly after that. Jen, are you back with us? Do you have a chance to give a quick update? And I don't know if she is. I know she's still on the call, but if she's not, I can kind of give it just a summary. Related to the parks strategies and priorities, I'll briefly just go through them. It's really about creating cross-sector partnerships to promote physical activity in parks. So that's why having the Healthy Schools and this, physical activity in parks and infrastructure group today could be a really neat way to explore what a cross-sector partnership might look like. Are there ways that schools can partner with the local park programs to encourage use of public parks? There's also a conversation about tracking participation through community-based physical activity programs. And so we've had a lot of conversations recently with folks doing community recreation, so free activities, oftentimes using parks because those are accessible spaces. And so how are we monitoring that so that we have a sense of what's working and which groups are bringing people out, especially post-COVID? It's a good question about do people feel safe using park spaces, coming back out to be physically active, and how do we know that? How do we follow that? And the third strategy is really about looking for more sustainable funding sources so that we can increase, affordable physical activity options for all residents. It definitely talks about health equity, specifically about making sure that park investments are equitable, especially in those neighborhood parks that are really accessible to residents. And so that last one is pretty similar to a project I've worked on that was funded by the UMKC Health Equity Institute, and it's working with Jordan Ayala and Brenda Brinkhouse Hatch. They presented couple of meetings ago with the PAPI working group about their Green Team Toolkit, which is a collaborative park design process. It's kind of an alternative to CPTED, which is known as Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design. And what it does is it kind of canvasses a neighborhood, having youth be the leaders of the process. And so Sumner Academy students at Sumner Academy in Northeast Kansas City, Kansas, have been leading that effort. There's about 6 regular participants in that group, but I know that the teachers are really excited about the possibility of having, I think they said up to 40 students participate in some of the fall activities that the Green Team is planning. So trying to develop a process where youth are the leaders helping redesign or propose redesigns for park spaces and vacant lots. That's just one example of an early action project that has been supported by the KCPA Plan out of parks. Also know there's a lot more going on parks, and I'm sure Jen, when she hops back on, can share some more resources and references. There's a lot of things that I know she's working on in KCMO Parks, and I know others like Allison at JCPRD and Angel at Unified Government. They're all doing really cool programming, and it's a busy time right now with people kind of coming back out post-pandemic. So the survey question for this section is sort of specific to healthy schools. It's been a long conversation about how do you prioritize park investments with the PAPI working group. The question has always been, do you invest in these regional jewel parks that maybe are a little further away? Or do you really focus in on neighborhood parks that are right outside your door. And how does that impact specifically for this cross-sector discussion, school-age children who might benefit from these as opportunities to be more physically active? And so I'm hopeful that you all can take a second and kind of rank. If you were, put your Parks and Recreation Department hat on, and if you were looking to support school-age children being more physically active, which locations would you invest most of your energies in? And so it looks like we're getting some responses, and small pocket parks within walking distance seems like a favorite. Hey, Jen's back. Jen, we're going through the survey question. So maybe you could hop in and just kind of give us some perspective on the work you're seeing done in parks, not just at KCMO, but around the area. The consensus seems to be building towards investing in small pocket parks and medium neighborhood parks that are more walkable and bikeable, as opposed to maybe the larger parks further away, especially for the audience of school children. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. Yeah. I actually definitely agree with that. I'll probably have to go to menti.com and put my 2 cents into that. But I do think, just from the KCMO perspective, we've got 221 parks, and we always talk about, investing in the parks in the neighborhoods or in the areas where people are, and upgrading the resources and the facilities that we already have, instead of building newer facilities or those locations that people have to kind of drive to. Just getting more involvement from the community definitely happens in those small, medium, like nearby parks that are in the neighborhoods. So that's just my perspective on that.
Emily asked the question if other people had thoughts. Does anybody else want to just kind of jump in and give their perspective?
I would say I think the small pocket parks are really kind of where we need to be right now. I think there's kind of a trend of people wanting to be in those types of spaces, especially with the pandemic happening. But I mean, there definitely is space for like a regional park. Like one that comes to mind is Penguin Park in the Northland. Like people will drive very far just to go to that park because of its facilities. But I think if we could just find a way to kind of thinking about Wyandotte County, I think making some of those smaller pocket parks feel safer. And I think also just having some sort of programming that goes with those. And I know that there's been some emergency ordinances passed for the pandemic to allow food trucks in those types of areas now. And so that's opened up some opportunity. But that's kind of my thoughts. But I think ultimately small and medium parks, especially talking with the communities and talking about kids too, those are the most important spaces.
I saw Nicole, and thank you, Blake. I saw Nicole in the chat said also that a mix of parks is necessary. And I wonder if what we're seeing is sort of a pyramid effect, like a few big parks is great, but having more small parks within a nearby walk is great too. I think that's definitely something that is a good idea of thinking about what is the right mix so that people have options to choose from. Anybody else have any thoughts?
I would just say I really agree with what you were saying, Blake. I do love large parks. If they are those destination parks, it does seem like, personally, because I feel like I'm an introvert, that like I have to prep myself to be able to go to those types of parks, because you're going to be around a lot of people, and it's going to be busy. It's going to be hard maybe to find parking, or did we pack our picnic, all that kind of stuff. So the little pocket parks for me offer like more of that ability to have the mental relaxation that I need. And if they're within walking distance, it's even better, because, maybe I just take my book over to the one we actually have, just this little side park over here, not too far away from where I live. And it's just kind of a little sweet little oasis right there that's just nice to be able to go to. And enjoy time in, and then I see neighbors walking past, and that's always fun to be like, hey. So, which may not happen as often at a bigger park.
Yeah, I can speak from experience. I meet my neighbors every time I walk to these little pocket parks on a route when I walk my dogs. So it is that social cohesion that builds up in neighborhoods, I think is one benefit of small parks that we don't often think about. So it's a good point. I'm going to go to what's our next slide? Okay, that's for later. So really, this is just kind of the open discussion period. I'll stop sharing my screen, but the point of today's meeting really was to just open up the floor to say, is there something that you all are working on that's an initiative? Is there a way to collaborate? Are there new ideas that are starting to pop up at schools? What funding opportunities might be available to look towards? Are there any barriers to really getting schools and parks and infrastructure connected? And then what's working well? So I'm going to stop sharing, but feel free to just kind of, if anybody feels like they have a way that they'd like to frame what they're seeing, feel free to go ahead.
Hey, Matt, this is Nicole. One of the things we've been talking about at our health department is just wondering what it's going to look like to interact with schools moving forward. I don't know if it's ever going to go back to free access, where there's 50 parents in the building every day and all that kind of stuff. So, I think for us, we're kind of in the short term taking a wait and see approach, because also look at the other hat I wear, we're the disease people. So, just I think it could create some opportunities though, too, because one of the things we always think about in our Safe Routes work is that it also benefits the entire neighborhood around the school, so maybe taking some of our programming out to, more like to neighborhoods instead of the school. Or, who knows? We're just really looking forward to seeing what's next, really kind of trying to keep an open mind and thinking in terms of maybe like a church that's near the school, or if there's a neighborhood association or something, because that way it would still be Safe Routes work, but engaging everybody, I think, is how you'll get more buy-in as far as the safe routes to the grocery store and to the bank and parks and that kind of stuff too. So we're just kind of taking a wait and see for this next school year, because really it may be a while before things are completely back to how we used to do it.
That's great. And I updated the Menti slide. So if y'all want to participate, you can add your comments in the chat. You can add your comments there. But I'm also taking notes in our Canva document so we can have a running list of what everyone's saying. So feel free to keep jumping in if y'all have any ideas or thoughts.
In our planning meeting, Jen brought up a really great idea, passion, direction the parks are going, of trying to look at like safe routes from school to parks and recreation center. So how do we build those relationships, build the built environment, the transit opportunities to get kids from schools to those recreation centers? Because I agree with Nicole that I don't think schools are in the fall just going to like reopen their doors to all of the outside programming that was there pre-pandemic. And similarly, we're shifting our focus to community-based organizations, because there is more flexibility in trying to meet families where they're at and kids where they're at, and it may not be schools.
I would add, this is Lee from Girls on the Run. We really have pivoted this past year in using park space and community space for our Girls on the Run practices, and safe routes to a park would be amazing. If girls are able to go to the park right after school, it just makes it more accessible if a parent doesn't have to come pick them up at school and get them to the park. And we have the same thoughts that the schools aren't probably going to just open up miraculously for us in the fall. So we are looking at all different opportunities in park space for our girls.
I think another thing, and if a good thing could have come out of the pandemic, I think we have seen people, and we've all heard this in a dozen meetings, that, people really are kind of using our infrastructure a little more than they used to. You see people, I didn't even know how many neighbors had dogs. What were those poor dogs doing before the pandemic? I guess just hanging out at home all the time. I don't know. Everyone's out walking their dog, doing all these things that they wouldn't normally do. And, I just think that part of what we should really try to do is work hard on encouraging people to use the infrastructure that's already here. Because in the olden days, I would once in a while hear, well, we put these bike lanes in, I'm not sure how many people use them, like to make sure that people are using the infrastructure, spending time on the education and outreach to encourage that, because I think that'll make it all the easier to make progress on this moving forward. If we can show sustained demand for that as we move forward and making people feel safe with existing infrastructure, even, I think it's going to make the case for some of the safe routes to transit stuff, which is important for jobs and communities and that sort of thing. So in the short term, when we can't get right to the school, maybe like we want, maybe thinking in those terms might be helpful as well. Just really encouraging people to stay out there using all this great stuff we do have, even though it's not enough. And that's something I think could be a great partnership between parks and any other group on this physical activity plan, just really helping people understand what's all available and to use it.
Thanks, Nicole. Mariana, I'm curious what you all are thinking about with your safe routes to school and active transportation kind of focused in Jackson County. Are you sort of taking a similar wait and see approach, or do you all have some focus areas that you're already identifying for next year?
Yeah, so right now we are just kind of coming out of COVID, I'd say, on our team. So it hasn't been too much concentrated thought. We're just trying to collect ourselves more than anything. I think those are really good points that have been made just about the wait and see approach with schools. And as Nicole said too, still being the health department, we kind of have a fine line that of like kind of I don't want to say reintroducing ourselves, but mending some fences on a number of things. It's been a long year for everyone, but I also think just, and I don't know if this has been brought up here before, but over the years of working with schools through my previous jobs as well, like I think too that I've heard from educators so much over the last decade has just been that schools are kind of the Band-Aid for all, because we have that captive audience. And so I think, maybe we're going to end up getting some new and renewed energy from schools now that we've kind of thought of ways to bring the programming to them, but not necessarily relying on the classroom teacher or relying on those, the kind of in-school structures, but we can partner with them, getting the kids to the park, getting them off. So I feel like there could be some, hopefully, new energy just comes out of the schools as well on all these types of activities too, just some of that pressure off of them. We've made it work without them for a year. Can we kind of expand that and keep that working? So that's hopeful.
Thanks for sharing that.
I noticed in the chat, Brad asked a question about who's financing and developing these parks, and Allison said it varies by parks. Some are funded by city, some by county, most are community improvement projects. It depends on who owns land and how it's obtained. Allison, do you want to say a little bit more about that, just to kind of add some context for what that looks like with you all at JCPRD?
Hi, yeah. So we have had land given to us and donated to the county before. And sometimes that land will just be a green space until we can get funding available to develop it. And a lot of our parks, like some of our trails, a lot of the bike trails and the dirt trails, those are managed and maintained by volunteer groups. And so it really just varies per area. I know in the Lawrence area, the bike trails over there, those are managed by volunteers. But then a lot of the paved trails also are managed by the city and whoever owns that park. But it also depends on what funding is available. So It varies per park, really, and how that land is obtained. Because sometimes we'll purchase lots of land for a green space as well. If that helps.
Yeah. Hey, this is Brad Winfrey. I work at Children's Mercy Hospital. I'm the manager of the injury prevention program, the Center for Childhood Safety here. And so, yeah, so I asked that question because where I live, it's pretty, there's quite a few of these little pocket parks. Like there's one at 67th and Row, then you go down and there's one at like 71st and Row. And then you have Tomahawk Park at Tomahawk and Row. So there's all kinds of these pocket parks, but they're all city funded. And so with the way budgets are, I didn't know if there were outside resources that could help cities
Yes.
with offset these costs, because I think that might be a big incentive. If a city doesn't have to take on the cost of purchasing the land and development of the park, and there's other grants available someplace else, I think you would probably get, obviously more buy-in can occur with the more people who are willing to participate in it. So that's just a thought I had.
Yes to that, Brad. That does happen at some of the parks. It varies on the park. Sometimes they'll have a neighborhood resident of a pocket park, and they donate money specifically to the agency saying, hey, I would like this to improve this specific park. It also varies per agency on how they take donations. So I don't want to say this, but I know that there are agencies who will take specific donations dedicated towards a specific program and or park. But then there are also agencies where like, no, we're sorry, you can't specify that. We can work to make sure some of it goes there, but they do have to put that in their big donations pot that projects are funded through.
Yeah. Okay.
So it varies, yes and no. It really depends on the agency when it comes to donations. But I know that we do apply for a lot of grants, and that's how we've gotten a lot of the nice trails that we do have in some of our parks, because a lot of those are grant funded as well.
Yeah. So is that information easily accessible if you work for the city? I mean, is that something that city administrators would know? Like, this is where you would go to if you had, let's say they tore down a house and the family said, we're going to donate this for a pocket park. Are these resources something that city administrators would know? Oh, here's a list of people that would help us fund something like this.
Yes and no. It also depends on where you live, and how involved your commissioners are with your park and rec agency. I know, and this is just speaking from Lawrence. I live in Lawrence and I used to work for them. Our commissioners were very involved with the park and rec agency. And so if you went to them, they're like, oh yeah, here, talk to this guy. And then they would send you towards the director and or the park superintendent. And so that way they could specify that.
Gotcha.
I would say that in most other cities, it's also the same. If they don't know it, then they can definitely get you to the person who would. But very rarely have they ever passed up on adopting land. And then the other thing to consider is whenever an agency is given land, if they don't have the staff to maintain that, because once you get so many acres, you have to have the right amount of staff in order to maintain that before they start contracting it out. Yeah. And then it goes down to budget too.
Gotcha. So there's a lot of other things that go along with, besides just getting the land. You need many more resources.
Yes. Like I know,
good to know.
Yeah. They contract out for a lot of the mowing. Not in Johnson County, but I know they do in Lawrence, just because I see the contractors in my neighborhood over managing a green space. And if they don't manage it well, I call that park guy. I'm like, yo, I got snakes. Come mow. What's happening? So
lots of pieces to this big puzzle. And it sounds like, I think one of the challenges of a regional plan is all the different jurisdictions as well, and partners and players involved. But also I think when we kind of zoom out and think about, what are those opportunities for our whole region, and what are some things that we I'm thinking today getting to be together is such a nice opportunity. I'm wondering from you all, what are your thoughts on what might be some regional kind of low-hanging fruit opportunities that partner schools and some of the safe routes to school priorities and the Parks and Rec and infrastructure priorities that you all have shared? Are there any things that sort of pop up when you think of what might be a low-hanging fruit opportunity? We've talked a little bit about like safe routes to school and safe routes to other places. I'm seeing in the chat some stuff around joint use. What are other things that pop into your head that we might work on together?
I'm curious to know, on top of that, Emily, and that's a great kind of recentering. We've been talking about this issue in the chat a little bit. I saw Robin comments about equitable issues. And are schools a place where in some neighborhoods where you might not have that strong neighborhood association, or the amount of resources needed to maintain the parks is too great for the Parks Department to maintain because of the questions that Brad was raising about funding? Do y'all see schools playing an active role to, I think the comments earlier, Girls on the Run goes from the school to the park. Is there a relationship there that, to Emily's point, could be a low-hanging fruit for this group to think about? Well, what's the way that gets applied? What does that look like?
I know that our agency has an agreement with some of the school districts. And Jill Leach, are you still in here?
Yes, I am.
Hi, would you be sorry to put you on the spot. Would you be able to talk about that relationship and agreement that the district has with Children's Services and the school and the after school time program?
Yeah, we have before and after school programs in DeSoto School District, all of Olathe, about half of the Shawnee Mission schools, and also Gardner. And we rent the space from the school, essentially. We work in partnerships with those districts to be able to offer before and after school programming to the kids in those programs. We also have care on winter break, spring break. Sometimes we're right now gearing up for summer camp, so I'm a little bit distracted today. So we've got camp starting next week, and those are also based out of the elementary schools, in addition to having our outdoor camps in the parks too. But we are working with our kids 12 months out of the year, so it is pretty fun.
Thanks for sharing that.
And so that's kind of a partnership that our agency has developed with each of those school districts. And then I know we work with the DeSoto School District as well in regards to their ball fields and ball field reservations, because the school manages those. And so if we were to get an inquiry about that, we would typically either take the reservation for them and then pass it on, or work closely with the school district to get those reservations. That's just like, we'll make sure we talk with them if we need to use overflow for tournaments. So there's kind of already that relationship between Parks and Rec and the schools in some areas. And I know KCMO, Jen, you guys ran an awesome program whenever the kids had to go remote.
Yeah, we did virtual learning and after school programming once they went back to hybrid. And so that's how we developed. We did not really have a relationship with Kansas City Public Schools, but now we do have a relationship with them through Campfire and Boys and Girls Club. We're working on providing a summer school after school program that will run for 5 weeks this summer. And one of the big barriers that we ran into is making that accessible for the middle school students, just transportation wise, getting them to the locations for the after school program, and then also providing transportation home if needed so that they could go either to a Boys and Girls Club site or a community center. And then we've also got a location at Camp Lake of the Woods located in Swope Park to bring some of those middle school students. And the middle schools are Central, Northeast, and it's escaping Lincoln Academy I think, or Lincoln Prep, something along those lines. So the transportation, to Swope Park from that location is pretty far. So taking that approach and using that relationship that we developed with virtual learning to hopefully provide more before school and after school care as we get into this new school year. I forget who mentioned it, but we don't really know what that's going to look like and what the schools are actually going to be doing. I think that they're going to go back 100%. KCPS has already done that, but then we saw about 2 weeks in, some complications with that in COVID. So we'll see what that actually looks like in a couple weeks.
Thanks,
Awesome.
Jen. And Jill and Allison too.
So Emily, I know you touched on Robin's comment when it comes to shared usage agreements. Robin, that's awesome that the one neighborhood allows that. I know in my sister's neighborhood they allow that too, but in other schools they don't. So that might be something, but I think that would have to be approached from a school administrator, and it varies by neighborhood and crime rate because we've seen graffiti in some of the parks. It depends on the neighborhood. So, and that would go back to maintenance staff and who's able to clean that up. But I think that would be a great starting point as well, is initiative for schools during the summer months to encourage kids to, hey, get out, our playground is available this summer, come here and play at a safe space. That might be an easy low-hanging fruit to do just to get with the schools.
Yeah,
I think that's a great idea because I'm just thinking about a lot of the conversations I've heard, and so I live near I can't remember the new name now, but it just got rebuilt, Northwest Middle School in Kansas City, Kansas, and they don't have a school track. They don't have a place for the kids to even be physically active, and I feel like some schools have different challenges than others. But if you put them on a ladder, it's like there's one step after another, right? So apply for grant funding to build park and wayfinding to get kids to and from safely to school. Next step, work with your local neighborhood association to make sure that those places are safe and clean, and so kids feel apply for more opportunities. Next step, look into shared use agreements so that the entire community can benefit. I'm thinking if you were to center all of these conversations around like, where are you now as a school leader, and what steps can you take over the summer months to be ready for the back to school in the fall, and like maybe every year that kind of we got to step 2, but we got to get to step 3 or 4, and like you could set some direction for some of these schools, because I feel like there's not a one size fits all approach, but that idea that schools could be that hub for recreation and connecting neighborhoods and groups. I'm wondering, that sounds like I'm trying to pull together the threads and see, is that like a low-hanging fruit approach that like the KCPA plan can support as like an action oriented thing that can actually get done in the near future and then shared with those school districts?
Well, I can speak to a little bit in Healthy Schools why we moved away from that as a priority. Mostly because it was not a low-hanging fruit. So there's 2 lived experiences. There's a lot of our suburban school districts, their recreation facilities are incredibly nice and they're already booked out. And it's a big moneymaker because private youth sports are already using their facilities after hours. And so if you need to get the gym or the field, even if you're an educator within the building, you need to apply for it very early because they're already booked. And those are the type of neighborhoods usually that where like the playground gets to stay open after school, it isn't locked, and the residents can go use it. And then you have all the layers you just talked about of some other schools are in slightly different neighborhoods and they have more challenges. So I know we've had schools in past with Champions for Health where they built a new playground and then it got lit on fire. So we helped them build another new playground. So those are like those lived experiences of it's so much more complicated than opening the school playground after hours. But I think it's worth, this group at least has a lot more players at the table, so it feels less intimidating to have that conversation possibly of, if you're a school that has your playground closed or your walking track closed to the public, why, and then where maybe as a KCPA plan can we help take away some of those barriers. So I don't want to like totally brush it off. It's just as a Healthy Schools group alone, it felt too big to take on, but maybe not as a cross-sector project.
That's good feedback.
Yeah, thanks so much, Michelle. I recall also from the conversation, just reference to the work that had been done and feeling like sort of the low-hanging fruit opportunities, because there had been some focus and investment in past years, which is probably partially what Andrea was linking us to. So I think it's, again, certainly like with, I think more partners could definitely be something that we, if we're listening to what schools are talking about this summer, that's something that really does, like if we have partners around the table, it wouldn't necessarily be a burden on like programming for a school, like a classroom teacher. Someone mentioned like classroom teachers aren't likely going to have the space to be involved in maybe programming this next year. So it wouldn't be an approach that would ask of that, which I think might be speaking to some of what y'all are talking about. So maybe something that we could bring back up in kind of listening again of where schools are at now and sort of what has their experience been. Like y'all mentioned, seeing people in the community interacting with our spaces really differently over this past year. It might be a good timing to sort of ask again about that and see, especially with partners around the table interested.
One thing I see with this too is, this might be one of those things to try to engage with neighborhood groups about too, because, do we want to, because this would be a big undertaking. So we want to be sure it's in a neighborhood where people want that. You know what I mean? Like if it's, or to find out why it hasn't been done, like you guys have said. So I think this might be one of those opportunities to also try to engage with the neighborhoods, to find out, their perspective on why they would or would not want to do that. Or is there a park nearby they would prefer? Or, just to really understand, because we all know what we think, but I think this kind of a thing in particular really comes down to the neighborhood and what that neighborhood is interested in. So if we had, in just some thoughts on that too, just to make sure we're not trying. It's a great idea. Of course, we should look at it, but we want to be sure that when we're doing that, I think it's going to be really neighborhood specific solutions and planning when we're doing something like that.
Excellent.
That's great feedback. I want to just take a moment. I don't want to end this conversation because it's been so good, but I do want to make sure we get through a couple things and then we can come back to this conversation here at the end. So I'm going to share my screen real quickly and just kind of give you all some perspective, take a quick little detour. And then in our PAPI working group meetings, we try to end the meetings a little bit early to give you all time back if you got to rush to something. But those of y'all that want to stick around and have that kind of conversation after the meeting, the ones that you're like, everyone gets up. If you find the one person you want to talk to, feel free to do that. That's generally how we try to keep these meetings going. But while y'all have been talking, it's been a great conversation. I've been taking notes. And so this, for those of you that haven't been to a PAPI working group meeting, our slides are readily accessible. And so we can share these at any time, and these notes will live in the meeting notes. You can go back to the very beginning of our first meeting. But this is a kind of a accounting of what we talked about. So if you ever kind of go, man, there's something that was said and I forgot what it was, here's an opportunity to kind of look back at what was said. So I was trying to capture everybody's thoughts. If I missed anything, I apologize. There was one question that did not get discussed, and I'll come back to this one in a second, but there was a question that came in through the chat about, are there successful outreach and awareness campaigns and programs that people have learned from? And I think that's a great question to follow up on the last one, which is, how are you making sure that school, that neighborhood groups are a part of the process, that they are, that you're responding to the specific context of the neighborhood? How do you reach out to them? I know from my experience, Right now in KCK, a group Groundwork NRG that I've worked with is sending out a all park survey, asking neighborhood residents about their perceptions of their neighborhood parks and kind of trying to do that at a park level. So that survey is getting distributed through the whole county. Facebook, things like that can help. I also know that there's groups in Wyandotte County that do things like livable neighborhoods, where they train those neighborhood leaders to do certain projects. And KCMO, I know Center for Neighborhoods at UMKC does a lot of work training neighborhood leaders. And so it might be an opportunity to plug in with those groups that are already in those spaces, like Livable Neighborhoods and Center for Neighborhoods, to maybe assist. Those are examples of, successful, outreach effort programs, and I'm sure there are more like them. But to kind of go to the next question for this group today, one of the things we try to do at these quarterly meetings is plan out what our next 2 meetings will look like. And PAPI has been kind of consistently meeting on the last Wednesday of each month. So for the next month, if there is a topic of conversation, here are a few examples. I know that the headline, the underlying one, is really the concept of what the theme would be about. That way, if you're interested in that, you can participate. If you're not interested at all, you can skip it, come to the next one, check out the notes if you're interested at a later date. But the bullet points are just examples that, I could come up with off the top of my head about projects that are doing that work. So, we had Girls on the Run talk about their work earlier. Would they be interested in presenting for 10 minutes and getting 10 minutes of questions and answers and conversation with the group? And we try to schedule, 3 quick presentations so that those groups can just meet with a larger network of folks to talk about the work that they're doing in real world. And some of that spins off into action projects like that surface transportation. So to participate in that, it looks like y'all are already in the space. That's great. So one person it is at least. So if you want to take the Minty survey, it's going to ask you, what should this group meet about next in June and July? So these are the topics that I mentioned. Again, it's kind of broad. We'll Laura Steele and Jen Jutt and I will work to kind of schedule out. If you have suggestions for those topics, email me, Jen, or Laura, or send them in the chat. But that's just kind of a broad cross section of the things that are related to the KCPA plan as kind of action projects. And so this is fun. This is the horse race of like who's got the most interest in seeing what this group looks at next. And I think this is feel free to add as many as you want. I did add one more that I didn't mention in the previous slide, which is anything that we talked about today. So healthy schools specifically, if there's a specific conversation about healthy schools that you want to have that's maybe more targeted, that can be another option as well. But it looks like accessibility and community recreation are seem to be some of the favorites. I'll wait as that comes up. But Jen, Laura, as you're looking at this, are there any folks that come to mind that you think would be a good potential? We try to do the top 2 and then kind of reevaluate after a couple months to see where we're at. So the group that shows up to these quarterly meetings tends to have the most impact. Laura or Jen, do you have any thoughts?
When it comes to accessibility, if we can maybe reach out to some local groups, some partners. I know we've got connections with folks from The Whole Person and Ability KC. I'm just trying to think of what might be meaningful to speak about regarding that topic.
That's great. Yeah, I think we'll definitely reach out to them in the coming weeks as we look towards getting a June and July PAPI working group meeting. And everybody who's not attended one of these before, you're welcome to participate and share it. And if you sign up for the newsletter, you'll get an early heads up when those meetings are scheduled. But you're welcome to put them on your calendar now. It's every last Wednesday of the month at 12:30 to 2, just like today. So this is great. It looks like we'll probably have, just based on the numbers, a community rec meeting in June. And I know we've talked a lot with folks doing things like Black Women Get Fit, and also Tony Temple's got his Temple Made Fitness, which uses park activities. So there's some people who I know would jump at the opportunity, and hopefully Girls on the Run might be able to join as well, to share the work that they're doing to promote community recreation. So to get to, I think that might be our last Menti slide. Oh, and any questions and answers? I know one question I saw come up in this, the Menti lets you ask questions at any point during the meeting. And so this might just kick off our meeting after the meeting. Yep, that's the last slide. So a question was, how have schools been using local parks and how has COVID changed that? So that might be a nice way to wrap up the meeting. We can start with that, and then y'all can take the conversation wherever you want for the last 15 minutes of this meeting.
Well, and as I listened to you talk about shifting over this past year and plans to potentially still be flexible and shifting directions over this next year, I do wonder if there are some opportunities there that are still targeting school age children, but it doesn't necessarily, I mean, like y'all are saying, doesn't necessarily mean a program in a school, but where would we shift our focus then, knowing that that this school year might still look sort of different. And so are there things, again, like as a group that together we might have an impact on for kids in our community, school age kids, whether that's at a school or at a park or routes to those places elsewhere. But that question kind of got me thinking to what you all were saying earlier about shifting related to COVID.
When I think about school parks, I think about two things, especially in specific areas of our metro. And one is, are they even up? Are they good for just when school's in session? Like, are they safe? Do they have enough equipment? And is equipment diverse enough for all the kids to be able to use it? And then I think also is some of those schools, and I mean, some neighborhoods, like we've talked about, the school is the playground or the school is the park for that neighborhood. And then, I'm thinking of one school that we've worked with quite a bit, and Laura, I know you probably have too, and we'll be working together on it later, is Eugene Ware over in KCK. And we've actually tried in the past to do some restructuring of their playground and put in a soccer field and, a baseball diamond and stuff over there, but nothing ever really came to fruition with it. So again, just one thing about it is when we think about school playgrounds, which in my mind, and I see and I hear is the playground for many communities, is there enough focus on just keeping those school playgrounds up to code to be safe, and then not only looking at them as a place for playgrounds, but also a places for other types of exercise, such as having a walking track or something like that along with it too. So just a thought I had.
Thanks, Brad.
And Brad, thank you for that. One of the questions in my head as folks were talking was, has there been any examples of like funding partnerships between Parks and Rec and schools where Parks and Rec might be using the school playground facilities for programming, or then schools have that built-in upkeep of their own grounds crew. And so I know one big demand from schools we hear often, at least from students, are that idea of a walking track. But it is a big financial undertaking for the schools to install. But the ones that have them, it's such an asset. So
sure,
I'm just wondering if there's any examples of some crossover on either joint grant writing
Yeah.
or allocation of funds between schools and Parks and Rec, as really designating the school as the pocket park.
Mm-hmm.
So then you're kind of doubling your dollars.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
I know that the one school I do know is Longfellow Elementary, and it's over here not too far from Children's Mercy. And before I started this job, the former director, Phyllis Larimore, worked with Injury Free Coalition for Kids, and I want to say State Farm Insurance, and they updated and modernized or Longfellow Elementary's playground there. And that's kind of going back to like Eugene Ware, from being over in that neighborhood and driving around that neighborhood. Yeah, there are no pocket parks, and the school is the center of activity for a lot of those kids. But that would be one, and one that we had talked about with one of the employees there was reaching out to State Farm, one of the local agents there, to see if they would be willing to partner with us in grant writing to develop something more beyond, because they have a playground and they have a big open field there too, which would be, a great place for some other stuff to go.
I know, and I say years ago, I'm not good with time anymore. It might have been 10 years ago, maybe 5, I don't know. But the Sunflower Foundation in Kansas used to fund, I'm going to say, tracks at schools. That's kind of an oversimplification, but I haven't heard of that in a long time. I don't know if that's still a thing, and I am happy to look into it.
I know that they've been working with Groundwork NRG on some of their Jersey Creek trail efforts. So absolutely, they're still in the game, and they'd be a great partner for the Kansas side to look into. I don't know if they limit themselves to just Kansas, but you're right. Sunflower Trail folks are really a great partner to apply grants for in this space.
I know a couple schools that we had worked with over time had gotten like community walking tracks put in at their schools through that funding. And so, we might be, I think, and a lot of corporations are starting to look into like community stuff too. You just never know. I think if, we all just need to keep our ears open, and if we get a chance to do a partnership somewhere, we'll just have to see how it goes. But I do feel like there are some leads for that kind of stuff, but not that we could do across the board for everybody. I think they tend to be kind of neighborhood or regionally specific.
I'll make sure to include some of those links that are getting shared in the chat as people start to peel off. I'll put them in the running meeting notes, so that if you're thinking, what was the name of that foundation or what was the name of that grant, you'll be able to go to those notes at any time and find them. I'll share a link to those notes too, just so you have them.
I would just add too, from a Girls on the Run perspective, just in this, short conversation, mentioning Longfellow, mentioning Eugene Ware, those are both schools that we have Girls on the Run teams. And so I'm wondering if there's some sort of collaboration when it comes to, asking for the, putting in for a grant. I think so often we feel like if there is collaboration, that gives you maybe more potential possibility of getting dollars. So I just throw that out there. I'm not sure how that could overlap, but Longfellow and Eugene Ware would be 2 amazing places to have walking paths, tracks for our girls. We love that. So
yeah, and maybe and some of the collaboration, I know we always think big, but sometimes I wonder if the collaboration is not just the local community stores and places like that want to invest in their community for kids, or for safety for kids and activities and stuff. I know, because we always think big, like, okay, what's a corporation we can go to, and sometimes I wonder if the best answers aren't right underneath our noses the whole time.
Yeah. Well, and I think, back to what Nicole said earlier about engaging the neighborhood and community. And Lee, you have a perfect opportunity to engage students at the school, and many of you do as well in your programming. And so engaging them about what would it be that would help you be more active, and would it be that trail, or would it be a improvement to the playground, or would it be something in your neighborhood to connect you to, maybe there, something that does exist, and that needs to be revamped a bit. So, I think to your point, Brad, is so good that, there's kind of this thinking regionally about what some big strategies are. And then there's also the really important neighborhood perspective then in implementing those kind of big strategy things to make sure that it's, fits with what the community identifies would be most useful.
Yeah.
Another funding opportunity just to consider is Alex Rotenberry presented on the surface transportation projects last time he joined us. There is a program called Planning Sustainable Places that the MARC runs that funds the planning and development of projects. And I think they look for like a contiguous project, but they might look favorably on a well-coordinated project that occurs in multiple sites to get that planning initiative off the ground. And that could be an effort that the Healthy Schools, infrastructure, and parks work together on. I know that this morning, Planning Sustainable Places funded Groundwork Energy's application for $125,000 planning effort that they did a kind of a scoping workshop with residents and neighborhood leaders to go walk the Quindaro Heritage Trail in Northeast KCPA. And so there might be a way to look carefully at those types of regional efforts and say, what's the Planning Sustainable Places grant that does safe routes from schools to parks with these community partners at these specific school locations where the work is already being done.
Right. That's a good point. Yeah. And that's a good point. Getting to the park is half the battle. I know a long time they did a project. Phyllis Larimore, who used to be in this program, partnered, and they actually did they gave elementary, and you guys might have heard about this, so stop me, where they gave the elementary school kids cameras and they had them take pictures of walking to school, what they saw. Did you guys hear about that? Yeah, which it was fascinating to see what the kids turned in for pictures of their neighborhoods, their sidewalks, their crosswalks, and those kinds of things. So, and then what their parks look like too, and what was actually in the parks.
So there's a project called People Make Parks that came out of New York City, and it's been one of my favorite ones. But it is a toolkit of all the different ways that you can work with communities to design parks. And I've kind of in my own work a little bit try to adapt some of those methods. But it's a really neat tool for people to use. Like photos and games and activities that make it fun, but also you're sort of building a park as you go. It's a neat idea. I'll see if I can find a link to share in the chat real quick.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Anything else before we wrap up? People are starting to peel off, but I like the meeting after the meeting where there's no like agenda, just whatever y'all want to talk about. Safe Kids Photo Voice. I love photo voice projects. I've actually done photo video too, because I think one of the challenges sometimes with photo voice, I love the method, but sometimes if you're not there, you don't get the stories. And so doing that in parks, but I could imagine, we just did a partner spotlight with Girls on the Run. Gina Lichty talked about the Girls on the Run at the community garden that Children's Mercy operates. And I could imagine doing a video voice research process as a researcher assistant at Children's Mercy, but having Girls on the Run go through a park design process at a park that they regularly use at a school nearby, and they're being interviewed, and that's the research is, why do you like this, and why does this make you feel good about the park? When we did it with the community garden, there's a clip in the audio where one of the girls says, "I'm feeding the people of Kansas City," as she's planting something. And I think there's a power in that, grant funders. grant funders respond to that.
Yes, very much so.
All right. Well, unless anyone else has got anything else, feel free to get on to the rest of your day. But thank you all for spending the time.
Thanks for letting me join.
Absolutely.
Have a good
Thanks,
day.
everybody. Have a good holiday.
Yeah, bye, guys.
See ya. All right. That went well.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I certainly think it might have been a slightly different conversation if we just had a few of those like key school folks. And again, I apologize about not even thinking about it being for some people the last week of school, which is like the worst timing. But I think it gives us a lot to think about, and Michelle, as she approaches schools over the summer, to listen. So I think it's great in that respect.
I think I mean, I don't know about you, but I thought it was like the right amount of people and the right folks in the room.
Yeah, definitely. And those folks do have a good pulse on, a lot of those partners have been working with schools for a really long time. So I think they do have a kind of pulse on what are some realistic and not realistic kind of things. But I think COVID does kind of turn everything on its head a little, which I think gives an opportunity for people to think differently, which is kind of cool. So thanks for your facilitation. The mentee was awesome.
Yeah, I thought that would be helpful to just kind of like, people can hop in and say all kinds of things.
Yeah,
And
I
so,
love breaking it up. It's great.
It's nice to have the perspective of a lot of people at once and not just one person's ideas. But I thought the conversation went well.
Yeah,
So
and
I know we're still recording, so I'll stop
Okay.
recording now for anybody that's
Yeah.
to watching the video. But thanks for watching for the extended cut of the Healthy Schools cross sector meeting.
Yeah.